On today's show, the Ottawa Senators roster reconstruction continues. Yesterday, GM Steve Staios trading for one of his guys.
And we lost one of our guys in the trade. Friend of the show and Belleville Senators legend, Egor Sokolov, will get a new opportunity.
We'll discuss what Jan Jenik can bring to Ottawa, plus a whole look at the depth chart. This is Locked On Sens.
I'm Jake Sanderson.
I'm Tim Stützle, and you're listening to the Locked On Senators podcast.
You're Locked On Senators, your daily podcast on the Ottawa Senators. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome! You are locked on to the Ottawa Senators, the only daily podcast covering the Sens. On the outskirts of enemy territory, I'm Ross Levitan, alongside Brandon Piller up in the Blue Mountains. Today's episode is brought to you by Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONNHL for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. That's the Game Time app, code LOCKEDONNHL for $20 off. Comedy, music, sports, terms apply. You can also follow the show on social media. We're at Sens Central on Twitter. You can also find the show wherever you get podcasts, including on YouTube, where the question of the day, leave a comment below to help the show grow. We want to know, is Staios done moving pieces on the chessboard? Today is Thursday, July 4th, and Pilsy, as exciting as this time of year is, it also sucks when you see some of your favorites leave. We got to thank Egor Sokolov for his service, not only as a fan favorite, but as you mentioned, a B-Sens legend.
Yeah, it's really tough to see a guy like Egor Sokolov go, Ross. Top 10 character, top 10 player, in my opinion. We didn't get to see a whole lot of him in the NHL. We did get to see his first NHL goal, though, Ross. We were in the building. We celebrated with him after at the Glebe Central Pub. So we'll always remember that. He's been a guest on the show multiple times. Hashtag friend of the show. And yeah, Ross, this guy did everything he could for the Belleville Senators. He is the Belleville Senators leader in games with 240, in goals with 76, in assists with 104, and points with 180. And he did everything he could to get this team to the playoffs, and they had a historic season. And it's going to be tough to watch Egor Sokolov leave, but it's a bittersweet moment because I believe this is a guy that deserves a new opportunity, and hopefully he gets that with the Utah Hockey Club.
A lot of people are saying the same thing about Jan Jenik, the return for the Ottawa Senators in that trade with two players who needed a fresh start. And I think Egor will get that in Utah. He's a winger. Ottawa brings in a centerman in Jan Jenik. And despite being drafted 2 years before Egor, Jan Jenik's actually slightly younger. They're both 2000 birthdays. So Jan Jenik is 23, will be 24 right at the start of this upcoming season. He was a third-round pick, 65th overall, whereas Egor was, 62nd overall? They're basically a wash in terms of their draft positioning. And last year in the AHL, Jan Jenik was able to put up 36 points in 55 games. Now, I mentioned Staios getting one of his guys. Jan Jenik played for the Hamilton Bulldogs for 2 seasons. And if you go look at Scott Wheeler from the Athletics article, he's a favorite of his. You could tell very quickly. Nobody is more competitive than Jan Jenik. Seems to be a theme that we're learning from him. He's one of those guys, and spot the trend, that sometimes you got to pull back a little bit discipline-wise out there. His last NHL game, he had an assist and got in a fight, a pretty spirited tilt against the Calgary Flames. I think he's going to fit the mold of what Steve Staios is trying to build, not only in Belleville, but this is going to be a guy, I think, competing for that fourth-line center position at training camp.
Yeah, I think he's definitely one of the guys in the mix, Ross, and this guy is a dog. I mean, he'll throw down, he'll fight, and he's had a couple opportunities in the NHL with the Arizona Coyotes. He's had 22 games, 4 goals, 2 assists for 6 points.
Goals. So that's absolutely sick.
Yeah, it is. So this is a guy that's going to get a new opportunity as well. And that fourth line center position is kind of in the air right now, in our opinion. So he's going to make competition much more difficult for those guys that are already fighting for that spot come training camp.
My ears perked up because that's how it should be. Last year, it felt
Yes.
like Mark Kaslick was just given that job before training camp. And it's like, those are the dogs that you want to see fight for every inch, every single time they're out there. No complacency on the fourth line. And as we pull up our depth chart here on YouTube, if you're watching, like Pilsy, you look at how things are set up. And I have taken Matthew Joseph obviously out of that. We touched on that trade yesterday, but I did forget to take his name out. So this is the updated depth chart. I've got Jan Jenik, who, by the way, does still need a contract, just like Egor was. Jenìk is an RFA, and because of the extra service time, being drafted 2 years earlier than Egor, Jan Jenik does need arbitration. Doesn't need it, but he can go the arbitration route. I'm going to guess that those two sides come to agreement before then, but it is worth noting Jenìk does not have a contract for next season. But like, look at that top, 5-6 players in Belleville. Järventi's played 4 seasons now in the American Hockey League. Cruikshank, 25, has played a ton of NHL last year at the end of the season. The unfortunate injury cut his season short. Ostapchuk, they really like him. Hayden Hodgson, they're paying almost $400,000 to the AHL. They've got different options that are going to push Jenìk, Gregor, Adam Gaudette, Zach McEwen. To me, that's how the fourth line, even the entire bottom 6 could be at times when you get injuries involved too. There has to be a healthy competition at camp in different areas. And I think that Steve Staios has done a good job here of adding depth to the organization. If you look at even the acquisitions that Ryan Bonus made during last season, getting Wyatt Bongiovanni and Jamison Reese, they have revamped the depth of this team. And from being patient and steady, Billsy, they've accelerated patience this offseason. And you can go into camp. This is a Steve Staios roster. Yeah, the top dogs were all here before. The Stutzlas, the Kachucks, the Bathersons, and the Norrises of the world. And the Pintos, obviously. But around the edges, you can say that this regime has officially put their stamp on things.
Yeah, and I think Steve Staios has pretty much mopped up the biggest mistakes that were left for him and cleaned up the roster and the cap the way he needed to. He was able to get all the things done off his checklist, in my opinion. I think, Ross, we're probably looking at maybe another bottom 6 guy being added and maybe another right shot defenseman. But other than that, this roster is taking shape, and you can see the way it's constructed, and you can see a team that should be able to have sustainable success rather than kind of the old Dorion way, whereas let's push everything in and hope just star talent is going to work itself out without necessarily making sense on paper. So that's where I have some confidence in the way this roster is shaping up.
So with that said, like, we still have so much time and GMs are going to be on the phone. You always see that like mid-July trade. A couple of years ago, it was Matthew Tkachuk. And, there's always that, whoa, I thought that the offseason was slowing down, but do you think the Sens could be involved in something like that? What I'm curious in is what they're going to do here with their remaining $3+ million in cap that they've created from the Joseph. There's no way the Senators go into training camp without a cap team, without being a cap team, which almost I had to pause and say that because it's so foreign historically for Ottawa, but they are going to spend that money. The question is where and who.
Yeah, I believe, Ross, we're going to see it happen later on when there's still some veteran guys that haven't signed yet and you can get them to cheap deals. I would be shocked if they don't make any more moves.
I like that as a fan. I like that as a guy looking at this decor and saying maybe that's where they should put their focus. And is a guy like JBD potentially still on the way out? Because I think you have to make room. I'm still floored that they didn't move Travis Hamonic. I still, like, when they could have bought him out.
Yeah.
That's what I mean. Like, moved him off the team for $350K. They would have saved the $700,000 with that, and then had the ability to put in another NHL body without dealing with waivers with JBD, or a situation where now you're one injury away from having Hamilton in the lineup every night. So I think this decor needs one more piece, preferably a right shot. And I think we can get into some names if you'd like, but I do want to do a little bit more of a deep dive on Jan Jenik after the break. We also have Sens Dev Camp coming on. We've got some great media availabilities from Carter Yakimchuk and Gabriel Eliasson that we'll discuss. But as this roster begins to take shape, we want to know in the comments, now that you can see online here or on the YouTube channel, what this depth chart looks like. Are they better or worse or different, but same than they were 2 weeks ago? Of course, I haven't pulled up the goalie depth chart, which is the biggest move this summer, getting Linus Ullmark in there to mop up the in-game messes that this team and every team will go through. So my answer is yes, they're a better team. They might not have the sexy names like they have with the DeBrincats and the Jacob Chikrins, but if David Perron can be a 50-point guy and be a pain in the ass to play against, I think that could be a replacement that I think gives the Ottawa Senators a better, more diverse look up front. Time will tell, though. We've been off-season champions before. It hasn't paid off. So we'll see what happens this fall, where the schedule is very daunting in the first couple months of the season. Maybe we'll touch on that later as well. Plenty coming up. You're listening to Locked On Senators. It's your team every day.
Today's episode is brought to you by our friends over at Game Time. It's summer, NHL, NBA, they're over. It's time for baseball, and nothing better than heading down to the ballpark on a beautiful day. But maybe you don't have your plans for when you're going to go see a baseball game. Maybe you want to wait and see how the weather is. And if you got time, you can head down to the ballpark with Game Time. You can do that because Game Time makes getting MLB tickets faster and easier with killer last-minute deals, all-in prices, views from your seat, and their lowest price guarantee. Game Time takes the guesswork out of buying MLB tickets. Ross and I aren't always the best planners, so we love that Game Time can give you deals on last-minute tickets if you decide day of you want to head to the ball game, get a couple pops, get some hot dogs in you. Looney Tuesdays for the Blue Jays. You got to bump up those records. We want to have the most hot dogs eaten at that ballpark, and you can do that day of with Game Time. And maybe you want to see what your seat looks like before you get there, so there's no surprises. You get a panoramic view from your seat in the app before you buy. So take the guesswork out of buying MLB tickets with Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONNHL for $20 off your first purchase. Again, create an account, redeem code LOCKEDONNHL for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Download Game Time today. Last minute tickets, lowest prices, guaranteed.
All right, Pilsy. It is July 4th, and we've already seen the Senators basically turn over their roster. It's impressive work, if you ask me. Now, some trades in particular, you feel like they've left value on the table. I know the Chikrin trade reaction. You're like, ugh, that sunk cost stinks when you look back to giving up a first and 2 seconds. But Nick Jensen comes in, and we've got the decor set in the top 4 at least. Up front, there's a little bit more question when it comes to the health of Josh Norris. We'll also get into whether or not Josh Norris should move to the wing. But Pilsy, Shane Pinto signed his 2-year contract, and yesterday he told Post Media that he is going to learn from the best in August. He is going to be packing up and heading out east. Look out, lower deck. Halifax is getting a beauty. Shane Pinto heading out to train with Drake Batherson, Sidney Crosby, Nathan McKinnon, Brad Marchand, and more. To me, this is as good as the possibly could be. We know that Pinto grew up a Penguins fan. We know that he's idolized Sidney Crosby. What better way to pick his brain than get on the ice with him for a couple weeks?
Yeah, what an incredible opportunity for Shane Pinto. And it's nice he's going to have fellow teammate Drake Batherson there too to kind of show him the ropes and teach him how these guys train in the offseason. And Shane Pinto in that article with Ian Mendez, Ross, he mentioned, and I believe it, that there's
With
no.
Bruce.
Oh, well, I'm talking about the one I read from Ian this morning. But he mentioned that there's no ill will towards the Senators for this. I think it's one of those things where it starts to look a little nasty on paper, and you get the reports out. The agent, Louis Gross, probably trying to speed things along and
It
maybe just
worked.
mix in a rumor about offer sheets, trade offers, things like that. And Ross, we talked about it. As soon as that Joseph deal was done, it seems like anything can change with a phone call. Steve Staios called him, up the offer. Pinto wanted to sign. He wanted to be back with the boys, and they got it done fairly quickly after that. So no ill will. It doesn't seem so. So I'm just so glad that the whole Pinto negotiation saga is over. It's massive because Pinto even mentions in the article, he's like, I was really starting to get nervous. We were going to have a repeat of last year and heading to September with no deal and training camp, and I'm sitting at home. So this is massive positive news for the Ottawa Senators.
Yeah, Pinto, man, we know he's a vibes guy. The guy can also straight up play. You look at just that two-way ability that he brings to the table, and he sets everything up. Like, he puts everybody in their proper slot in terms of how they fit in on the depth chart. Now, you mentioned Drake Batherson. Obviously, he's a top 6 guy. A lot of people are saying, hey, why don't you move Shane Pinto as the second line center and move Josh Norris to the wing? Now, in our depth chart, we've moved Ridley Gregg to the wing where he played at times last season. And I just want to say, I understand where fans are coming from moving Josh Norris to the wing. The only problem is he's never played wing in his entire life. I think it's more likely that we see one of the situations like with Timmy where he plays center, but there's a guy taking faceoffs for him. I think that's probably the way I would lean. Because think about where Josh Norris thrives on the ice. He thrives with speed, exiting the zone and entering the zone. I don't want to take that speed outside of the middle of the ice. He's also a guy who I think could pop out and find shooting lanes a little bit easier in those more difficult areas, the way he can get his puck off his stick. So to me, I'm not ready to have that yet. I'm going to trust the doctors and say if they can fix up his shoulder proper, he should be a centerman. If you have to change positions because of a potential injury, you might not be 100% or well enough to play. That's kind of the direction I'm taking on this.
Yeah, I think a lot of fans want Norris on the wing. I don't think necessarily the team is that interested in it, or Norris is, but I'll play devil's advocate for that argument, Ross, and I'll argue on the side that Norris should be a winger, not because of the injuries, but just I think he's a guy that I envision. You mentioned in the middle of the ice might be better for him. I think him being a rush player and just coming into the blue line and getting that puck on net from the wing, that could be something he could have success with. It tones back his defensive responsibilities as well. And Josh Norris is still good in faceoffs. Like, it's not like his faceoff numbers have plummeted because of his shoulder injury. Now,
yeah, fans are just nervous every time he takes one.
That's what I was going to say. It still puts a lot of pressure on those shoulders, and that torque on his shoulders might be tough. So maybe you put him on a wing with Brady and or Giroux somewhere. Well, I guess Norris would probably play the left side. Or, well, wait, let's have this discussion. If he goes to the wing, what wing do you want him on?
That's the thing. It's like he's already never played the wing. Now you're going to put him on his off wing?
But as a shooter...
I know. How about as the guy who's trying to pick up pucks off the wall when the D's rimming them around? Easier said than done.
Yeah. But hey, Josh Norris was paid nearly $8 million to score goals, Ross.
Yeah.
So I want to put him in the best position to score goals. Josh Norriskov or Norislav, get him the Russian factor and get him playing on his off wing so he can tee up those one-timers. He better be doing that on the power play. Let me start off with that. If we see Josh Norris on the left side of the power play, I'll
go crazy.
Yeah, I'm gonna lose my mind if that happens again. But yeah, I think the reason, Ross, I guess my main argument for putting Norris on the wing is the way it shapes out the rest of the roster. Like, if you had a line, Brady, Timmy, Giroux is your top line, Norris on the wing, Pinto, Batherson. And then a third line of Perron, Greg, Amadio would just be awesome. And then the fourth line, I mean, that's not really affected by how the Norris position shakes out. But I just think your top 9, if you set it up that way, would be very, very interesting and well balanced.
I also think there's an argument to be had that Ridley Gregg centering David Perron would be maximum chaos, having those two on a line together. But these are in-game adjustments too that Travis Green can decide how he feels is necessary. And I mean, we can do a whole show, and we will later this summer, on who has the inside track on that fourth line center position, because I don't think you can count out Adam Gaudette even. We didn't mention yesterday when the contract came through, he's got history with Travis Green. I think at least half of his NHL games were under Travis Green while playing for the Vancouver Canucks. So he knows what this coaching staff is all about too. And you got to think he signed here wanting to push for that NHL job after scoring the most goals in the American Hockey League last year. So there's so much fascination to me with the center position here. And whichever way you slice it, they're getting a good winger out of the center position, and you can never have too many natural centermen on the team. You'll need them, especially with the injury concerns that we've seen down the middle for the Senators in years past. As yes, I will say once more, the Ottawa Senators in 53 games with all of Stützle, Pinto, and Norris are 32, 18, and 3.
Wow.
Absolutely bonkers. So we'll see how this all continues. That's why, for now, Pillsy, all those games, all 53 of those games, all 3 of those guys were playing center. None of them played the wing in any of those 53 games. So my depth chart on day 1 at camp will have Stützle, Norris, Pinto down the middle. I rest my case. Do you have any final? Would the defense have any final deliberations?
No, I think that is what's going to happen, Ross. I would put it as very likely that that's the way it shakes out. But maybe as the season goes on, injuries happen. Travis Green tries to change things up a little. Maybe we see that happening. But I think for the most part, Norris on the wing is a fan theory at this point.
So more development camp is happening as we speak. Some photos coming across the board. We're looking to get some of those prospects. And we need to catch up with David Bell as well. I just saw a photo of him on the ice. We had a great chat with him at last development camp. So we're looking to get Bellsy on next week. Shane Pinto could be joining the show. And we might have one of our white whales later this month. But I'll leave it at that for now. One thing I can tell you is the Senators have signed one of their prospects that took the largest step from their ability or scoring ability and just overall game from the 2 years ago to last season. We'll tell you who that is and who is Jan Jenik. Those conversations continue next. You're listening to Locked On Senators, your team every day. All right, Pillsy, before we get back to today's episode, just want to shout out the Glebe Central Pub. They are back. We have agreed to a contract extension with our great friends at the Glebe Central Pub. Make sure you head to the Glebe Central Pub and let them know that Locked On Senator sent you. It's been an awesome relationship over the last 2 seasons, and we cannot wait to keep it rolling.
Yeah, Ross, we're so stoked to keep things going with the Glebe Central Pub. Listeners of the show have heard about it. If you've been there with us there, you know it's an absolute blast. The shuttle was so much fun, and we got some fun things cooking up, Ross. We've done a live show there before. We're definitely going to look into doing that again. That was one of the highlights of my time on the Locked On Senators podcast, and we want to do more fun things like that. So keep your eyes open with the Locked On Senators podcast and Glebe Central Pub.
779 Bank Street. Go check them out. They're right there, right walking steps to Lansdowne, and you can be able to incorporate that into your daily routine because it is your neighborhood pub in the heart of the Glebe. So shout out to them. It makes me cry, though, because we had a shot ski with Egor Sokolov at the GCP right after his first NHL goal. You never know who you'll see at the GCP. I remember Phil Lallier was there, and he's like, dude, we're hanging out with Egor at the GCP. I said, you never know who's going to be at the GCP.
Especially when the vibes are free. I want to get, I feel like we glossed over Egor leaving a little bit.
I know.
I want to get into that a little bit more. Like,
we led the show with it.
Yeah, but I feel like we didn't get into Egor enough here. Like the personality there, like him caring so much about that community. Like if you think this guy didn't care, go watch the video when he scores that goal and he's pumping the crowd up. And right away, the after game interview, he's dropping F-bombs and he's just so fired up. Like the passion that this guy had, he's such a character. Watch any of our interviews with him. He's got us laughing pretty much the whole time. The boys on the team love him. So it really is sad to see good character guys like that move on from the organization, but we're wishing Egor all the best.
All the best. And I think this is a great opportunity. You look the way that it's constructed in Utah. They shored up the decor. They're going to need some guys who are stepping up and taking on bigger responsibility and bigger roles up front. And I think he could do well learning from a guy like Lawson Krause, who's in the top 6 in Utah and has had that longer development path. And Krause was a lottery pick, I think 9th or 8th overall, but it took him a while to be able to get to the level he is. So I think Egor could do well from learning from him. We're going to miss him, and we'll be fans of Egor's for life. I got his broken stick that he scored the game-winning shootout goal in Manitoba on, and he signed that one up for me as a joke. And now I use the other end of it. My dog hides under the bed, so I use the end of the stick to like shoo him out from under the bed. So I appreciate that from Egor. But obviously, with opportunity coming for Egor, opportunity comes for Jan Jenik, who we mentioned played for Steve Staios, but I don't think we did it justice there, just how much of a fan Steve Staios is of Jan Jenik. That article that I referenced from Wheeler, like every single thing that Staios says about him, leadership, competitiveness, and an ability to come through in big moments. Like, does that not just scream perfect depth player, a guy who has a little more NHL experience than Egor? I think that is a little bit more negligible. I think the real difference is the positional need, and the Senators moving on from Kastelic, they're able to get a guy who's going to compete for that fourth line center role. And hey, if it doesn't work out, then you have the wing as an option. But they're giving themselves more versatility and more flexibility with this move.
Yeah, I would agree, Ross. And the thing, we talked to Wheeler at the draft, Ross, and he was mentioning, I believe you asked him the question like, hey, what can you tell us about the way Steve Staios drafts? And Wheeler mentioned right off the bat, Steve Staios had very interesting approaches to the CHL import draft. Like the import draft is where Steve Staios made his mark. You think of a guy like Arthur Kaliev, then you have Jan Jenik here. Like these are the types of guys that Steve Staios was able to find internationally and bring in, and had a lot of success doing that. So Jan Jenik was brought in here, Ross. I think we need to keep our eyes still open for the possibility that Kaliev could be coming to Ottawa too.
Yeah, maybe. I don't know. At this point, I think, you know what? If you had given me the option of Kaliev or Jenik, I might take Jenik just because the speed and the competitiveness are never in question with them. Where I feel like Kaliev, he's kind of a Kubalik, all the tools but no toolbox kind of guy.
Yeah, no, that's definitely a fair assessment.
However, I mean, we just said they need another more depth piece, so we'll see what happens. But with Jan Jenik, I think you're getting a guy who should be ready to take the next step. Being 24 years old, you got to hope so, because right now it almost feels like a bit of a plateau in the AHL, where in 55 games he did score 16 goals and have 36 points. Obviously, nowhere near the production that Egor Sokolov was able to put up. What did Egor have? 50 some points this year? He was definitely in the 50s, but for me, it's just, look, he had that taste at the end of the season, Jan Jenik, but it was a fourth line role. I think that he's going to be hungry in camp, and I'm actually excited to see what happens next for Jan Jenik. The guys at McKean's love him. If you read their scouting reports on him, they're a big fan. Jenik, by the way, is 6'1", 192 pounds listed, so we'll see Jan Jenik at camp after the two sides do agree to a contract extension. Speaking of contracts, Pilsy, Sens Development Camp rolls on, and it feels like a nearly yearly tradition. 2 years ago, it was Tomas Hamara who got his entry-level contract at training camp after being selected by Ottawa. And now his former teammate with the Kitchener Rangers, Matthew Andonovski, a fifth-round pick from the last draft in 2023, he signs his ELC, and what a come-up it's been for Matthew Andonovski. We famously discussed last year that in over 100 games in the OHL, he had 0 goals. Well, this past year, in 65 games, he had 7 goals and doubled his previous career high in points, while leading the Ontario Hockey League in plus minus with plus 58. Oh, yeah. And he was 4th in the OHL in penalty minutes. This guy is a high event defender.
Yeah, he gets it done statistically all over the board here, Ross. And I feel like Andonovski is one of those guys where everyone is so impressed with his progression, especially you hear from the Kitchener Rangers camp. He's a huge part of that team. And I'm excited to see what he can bring in his 4th and final year in the OHL next season, Ross. And this is a guy that is going to be a leader on that Kitchener Rangers team. We're going to talk to our pal, Sean Fafaro, Kitchener Rangers Rogers TV host. He's going to tell us all about Ando's last year and the newest Kitchener Sens in Alinas. So it's going to be interesting to follow that team, and I'm going to try to get a couple scouting visits on the Rangers here this season.
Okay. Well, here's what Steve Staios had to say about the deal, and I do find it interesting, right? And it will continue to really kind of perk my attention. What happens with the Senators 2021, 22, and 23 drafts? Because we know that they weren't maybe popular outside of the realm from who took them. So now that it's a new guy in charge, it's going to be curious to see who he leaves off and who he signs to bring into the organization. In the press release the Senators put out yesterday, Steve Staios says Matthew Andonovski has made significant progress since being drafted. He's a big, strong defensive defenseman who plays with sizable edge. His determination and competitiveness are arguably his best assets. We've been looking forward to seeing him throughout this week's development camp. Pretty high praise from the general manager.
Yeah, big time, man, and well deserved, Ross. Like this is a player that, where was he drafted? 5th round, 140th overall, and he's one of the top defensemen in the OHL as far as like all-round players go. So you'll love to see it.
So he'll be going back for one more year in the Ontario Hockey League with the Kitchener Rangers. Congratulations to the Andonovski family. You have an NHL contract in your hand. Speaking of development camp, it seems like all reports are saying that Carter Yakimchuk has sick hands. Not that his highlight reel didn't already show that off, but that's been the highlight. We talked about the roster there, and with Tyler Boucher out injured, he is the top prospect draft slot-wise, and it's not even close. Second is the guy they took second this year in Gabriel Eliasson at 39th overall. So I hope to continue to see great reports. We're going to have Bring Back Lee, our guy Kevin Lee, on the show on Monday or Tuesday, and we're going to discuss Dev Camp. We might have to push that if we get a certain someone. However, with that, I do love Kevin's insight. And Pesky Sickos, at Pesky Sickos on Twitter, he's upgrading his gear like you are with your microphone, Pillsy. The camera work on this guy, Pesky Sickos at Dev Camp, is awesome. So go give him a follow for some more content from development camp. We were obviously boots on the ground last year, but with the draft, quick turnaround this year. So couldn't make it work, but it is awesome to see the guys out on the ice, training, learning from the Ottawa Senators, what it is to be a member of the organization. I know last year they brought in Brian McGrath, and they bring in these different speakers to get through to these players of what it's going to take for them to turn from prospects, which they feel like they've accomplished such a goal, and they have, but now the work just begins, and it's about getting to be an NHL contributor. So that's our Dev Camp discussion, which we will be continuing. By the way, the 3-on-3 event is tomorrow and will be only open to season ticket members, but we'll do our best to get you the information, and hopefully they stream it. I mean, really, Pillsy, that would be huge.
Yeah, it would be. I want to talk a bit about Dev Camp, Ross, especially Gabriel Eliasson. I mean, it's no secret I was very critical of the pick of the prospect. I'm not going to hide from that. You can find everything I've said on it. But look, Gabriel seems like such an awesome kid in his availability. He's smiling the whole time. He seems so happy. He's so stoked to be here. Is it still an interesting draft selection at 39th? Yeah, I'll maintain that. But now that he's a Sens prospect, He's got the Sens jersey on. The draft is over. I'm not thinking about guys they passed on or the scouting approach. I'm moving past that, Ross. I'm cheering for this kid big time. I think, and it was nice to see the honesty. I think Claire asked him, what do you see your projection leading to the NHL? And he said 3 to 5 years. So I think that's definitely accurate. I think there's a lot of work to be done there, but get him in Dev Camp, start working on him. Looks like he's going to go to the USHL next season, Ross, which I think is a great spot for him, and see how he progresses along. It's going to be fun to watch him develop because he's going to have some highlight reels of just running guys over. But this is a kid I'm hoping all the best for now that he's on our side.
And speaking of Eliasson, he was drafted 12th overall by the Niagara Ice Dogs. An interesting landing spot. Usually the import draft, there's a lot of agent discussion like, hey, if you take him, if London takes him, maybe we're coming.
Because
but
the Bulldogs didn't get in on that, Ross.
Right. So the import draft was yesterday for the CHL. And even after that, I mean, he had a feature in the biggest Swedish publication for hockey yesterday. Gabriel Eliasson did, and his plan is to go to Cedar Rapids in the USHL and take the college route through Michigan. Of course, a great program there, but it is worth noting that in the CHL import draft, it was the Niagara Ice Dogs who picked up that pick. I'm just looking right now to see if there was a pick by nope. The Brantford Bulldogs did not have a pick in before them, so they would not have had the opportunity. So maybe a trade's in order. They could be. I do think the CHL would give Eliasson the benefit of not having college refs. We saw that happen with Tyler Clevin getting kicked out of every other game.
But
so we'll see.
Spin zone, Ross, maybe that's a good thing because Eliasson depends so much, almost exclusively, on playing a physical game. So if he goes somewhere where the reins are going to really be pulled in and he's not going to be able to get away with what he used to be able to get away with, that forces him to work on other parts of his game and round out some of those raw tools that he has. So that might not be the worst path, Ross.
All right, Pills. Any final thoughts on today's show?
Well, final thoughts for me, you alluded to it. I'm working with a new mic here. Shout out Rode microphones. Hopefully you guys notice a difference. I thought it was time to make an upgrade as I was just using my laptop microphone for the longest time. Unfortunately, my Yeti kind of crapped out on me, so I wanted to make an upgrade here. So hopefully sound a little more crispy on today's episode.
Oh, yeah. You sound great, Pillsy. And not only that, but we love the insight always. We appreciate everybody who makes Locked On Senators a part of their daily routine. You can find us on Twitter at Sens Central for more. And please consider subscribing to the podcast wherever you get yours. We are on the middle of a historic run that we'd like to carry all the way through the summer and allow the vibes to remain above the ceiling throughout the rest of the season. I think Sens fans as a whole, after 7 years of missing playoffs, they deserve it. Now, the Atlantic Division is no joke, and we'll have plenty of time to preview next year. But for now, it's continuing to massage the roster. Before, it was a revamping. The makeover, I would say, has been complete, at least from the major move standpoint. Gone are Chychrun, in comes a goalie, and so on and so forth. But now, how are you going to maneuver around the edges to allow this team to have the most competitive depth and best in class? Those conversations will continue, but tomorrow on the show, we will be targeting specific defensemen who are available in free agency, who we think deserve some of that Sens precious cap money. So those conversations will continue. For today, we say goodbye. Thanks again for liking, listening, commenting, watching the show. It really does mean a lot. For Brandon Piller, I'm Ross Levitan. This has been another edition of the Locked On Senators podcast, your team every day.